This morning, as I folded a few old pillowcases by the bedroom window, I paused with one in my hands. It was soft and worn, the kind of cotton that's been washed 100 times. It didn't match anything else on the bed anymore. But still, I held on to it. There's something about these little things, isn't there? We keep them because they remind us of something, or someone, or a time when things felt more certain. And before we know it, the drawer won't close. If you've ever stood in front of a shelf or a closet and thought, why do I still have this? But still couldn't put it in the giveaway box, you're not alone. Today, I want to gently walk you through 8 common decluttering mistakes. The kind many of us make without realizing, not because we're careless, but because we care. Maybe a little too much. There's no blame here, no shame, just some quiet stories, some soft realizations, and maybe a few gentle shifts that could help your home feel a bit lighter. I remember talking to my neighbor, Margaret, she's 75 now, who once told me, I kept trying to tidy up, but it always looked messier. I thought I was doing it wrong. Turns out, I was just holding on to too many things that weren't mine to carry anymore. That stuck with me, and that's really why I made this video. So if your home feels heavier than your heart wants to carry, come sit with me a while. Let's untangle this gently, one small thread at a time. This morning, while reaching for a sweater in the back of my closet, I knocked over a stack of old photo frames tucked into a shoebox. Frames without photos. Some chipped, some still wrapped in yellowed paper from the move back in '92. I sat down on the edge of the bed, held one of them in my hands, and for a long moment just stared. Not at the frame, but at all the decisions I hadn't made yet. That's how decluttering often starts, doesn't it? A nudge, a knock. Something falls and we tell ourselves, all right, time to finally go through this mess. But without realizing it, we grab a trash bag, roll up our sleeves, and start tossing. Or worse, we start moving piles from one place to another, thinking we've done something meaningful. I remember my sister-in-law, Joan, she's 68 now. Last fall, she spent the entire weekend decluttering her spare room. I was on fire, she told me, until I found Dad's old army jacket in the back of the closet. She sat with that jacket on her lap for over an hour. Then she folded it back up, placed it in a different box, and left the rest of the room untouched. The truth is, decluttering without a plan is like heading out on a road trip with no map, no bags packed, no gas in the tank. You might feel like you're doing something, but you're really just circling the same block. And for many of us in our 60s or 70s, there's more at play than just stuff. There's the guilt of letting go, the stories attached to old dresses, chipped teacups, and birthday cards from someone who's no longer here. Sometimes we don't plan because we're afraid that planning means deciding, and deciding means facing what we've avoided. But what I've learned is this: decluttering isn't about being productive. It's about being ready. Ready to ask, gently, what do I want my space to feel like now? Because the goal isn't to have less. The goal is to feel lighter. Sometimes we declutter not because we want to let go, but because we're finally ready to breathe again. And maybe, just maybe, the first real plan we need isn't a checklist. It's just the decision to be kind to ourselves in the process. Next to that stack of frames was a little notebook I didn't remember placing there. It was blank, untouched. I think tomorrow I'll open it and begin by writing down just one small corner of the house I'd like to feel peaceful again. And that brings me to something I think we all stumble into, especially when we're trying to do it right. I was folding dish towels the other afternoon, the kind with little cherries embroidered on the corners. One of them had a stain that never quite came out, no matter how many times I washed it. It used to be part of a set my late mother-in-law gave us the first Christmas after I married her son. And even now, after all these years, I've kept that towel. Not because I use it, not because I love it, but because throwing it away would feel like I'm throwing her away. You ever feel that? That tug of guilt, soft but steady, like a thread you forgot was wrapped around your heart. I once helped my neighbor Irene go through her china cabinet. She's 74, lives alone since her husband passed. We found a teacup cracked down the middle. Couldn't be used, couldn't be repaired, but she held it so gently, like it might break a second time in her hands. It was my sister's Mitte, she said. She never even liked tea, but she gave it to me when I turned 40, and now she's gone. So we wrapped it back in tissue, placed it in a box, and set the box back on the shelf. That's the thing about guilt-based keeping. It doesn't preserve the memory. It preserves the weight. We're not afraid of forgetting. We're afraid of what it says about us if we forget. Will they think we didn't care? Will we feel like bad daughters, bad mothers, bad friends? But the truth is, memory doesn't live in the object. It lives in how we love them. It lives in who we became because they loved us back. And letting go of a chipped cup or a stained towel doesn't mean we're letting go of them. You're not dishonoring someone by releasing the item. You're honoring yourself by creating space to breathe. That towel, I finally let it go last week, but I kept the cherries, cut them out, stitched them into the corner of a new cloth I actually use. It's funny. Now, every time I wipe the table, I smile. Not because I'm holding on to guilt, but because I'm carrying forward just the part that warms my heart. And sometimes the things we hold on to aren't even tied to people, just old versions of ourselves we're not quite ready to say goodbye to. I remember a rainy Tuesday, not long ago. The kind where the light never fully arrives and the house feels quieter than usual. I had a laundry basket in one hand and an old cardigan in the other. The cardigan was too big for me now, a little stretched out at the sleeves, but it had been my go-to for morning coffee on the porch for years. I stood there staring at it, and I couldn't decide, keep it, toss it, donate it. I wasn't even sure why it felt so heavy in my hand. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was me. The truth is, I was tired that day, not just sleepy, the kind of tired that lives in your bones, the kind that comes not from doing too much, but from feeling too much. And I've learned that's the worst time to make decisions about what stays and what goes. Decluttering when you're tired doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to more second guessing, and sometimes to regret. My cousin Louise once told me she cleared out 3 drawers of her dresser late one night after a long shift at the hospital. She'd been meaning to do it for weeks. She tossed a bunch of scarves she hadn't worn in years. But the next morning, she cried when she realized one of them was the last thing her daughter gave her before moving across the country. Louise didn't regret letting go of the scarf. She regretted not being present when she did it. We make better choices when we're grounded, when we can hear ourselves think, when we're not rushing just to feel productive. And maybe that's the deeper truth. Sometimes we declutter not to lighten our home, but to quiet a restless feeling inside. And when we do that while tired, it only stirs up more noise. You don't have to clear it all today. You just have to be kind to yourself in the process. So now I wait for the good light. I wait for the days when my heart feels steady. That cardigan, I folded it, kissed the collar, and kept it. Not because I had to, but because I was clear enough to know it still brought me comfort. And the hardest decisions aren't always about stuff. Sometimes it's the ones tied to who we used to be and who we're slowly becoming. This morning, I was folding a few tea towels, the ones with the faded cherries printed on them. The seams are frayed now, and there's a little coffee stain on one corner that never quite came out. But you know what? I kept folding them neatly, just the same. They remind me of Sunday breakfasts with Ruth, pancakes and radio music playing low in the kitchen. It made me think about how we often chase this idea that everything has to be just right before it's enough. that a home must look like a magazine to feel peaceful, that decluttering means color-coded bins and drawers that open with a perfect sigh. I've made that mistake too. Years ago, I helped my sister Nora clean out her guest room. She had big plans, matching baskets, labeled containers, even a Pinterest board printed out for reference. We spent the whole day moving things around, but by evening she was in tears. Not because it wasn't clean, but because it wasn't perfect. She thought decluttering would bring peace, but what it really brought was pressure. That room stayed untouched for months after. And maybe that's the quiet truth. When we make peace compete with perfection, peace always loses. Sometimes the drawer still squeaks. Sometimes the books don't line up. And sometimes we keep a wrinkled tea towel because it holds the sound of someone we miss. For so many women I've known, especially after 60, the house becomes not just shelter, but memory. And in trying to make it flawless, we risk wiping away the fingerprints of real life. Your home doesn't need to be perfect to be peaceful. It just needs to be honest. Now, I try to tidy like I'm caring for a friend, not performing for a guest, gentle, not rushed, loving, not rigid. And then there are the things we don't see, the ones we carry in the corners of our heart, not our home. Those are the ones we'll talk about next. I was wiping down the top of a bookshelf the other day, the kind of shelf that doesn't hold much anymore. Just a small photo frame, an old ceramic bird I once found at a flea market, and a candle that hasn't been lit in years. Nothing fancy. But as I reached for the frame, my hand paused. It was Ruth and me on our trip to Oregon, the coast behind us, wind in her hair, her hand tucked into mine. I must have looked at that photo 100 times, but that day, it stopped me. I didn't cry, but something in me softened, like a breath I'd been holding finally let go. You see, the mistake I made when me, and I've seen many others make too, is thinking decluttering is just a matter of space. Drawers, boxes, closets. But it isn't, not really. It's memories, it's stories. It's the part of us that can't be sorted into keep or donate. And, when we ignore that emotional layer, we often end up feeling more cluttered, not less. A friend of mine, Irene, she's 72 now, once told me how she tried to clear out her late husband's clothes 2 months after the funeral. Everyone told her it would help her move on. So she folded and bagged everything, but then left the bags sitting in her hallway for a year. She said every time she passed them, it felt like losing him all over again. Not because of the shirts or the shoes, but because nobody had told her it was okay to not be ready. We rush ourselves. We tell our hearts to catch up with our hands. But the truth is, sometimes the heart needs more time. There's a quiet kind of grief in letting go, not of the object, but of who we were when we held it. The version of ourselves who once wore that dress, played that music, stood in that photo. And when we skip over those feelings, we don't truly release anything. We just move it around. Decluttering isn't about getting rid of what's heavy. It's about honoring what mattered and letting it rest. Now, when I touch something that holds weight, emotional weight, I sit with it a while. Sometimes I keep it, sometimes I don't. But either way, I make space not just on the shelf, but in my heart. And then there's the guilt, the kind that whispers, you should keep this. We'll talk about that next. It's a quiet trap many of us have fallen into. I was folding laundry the other day. The slow kind of folding, where your hands know the rhythm, but your mind is elsewhere. I just cleared out the linen closet that morning, and there were extra sheets I no longer used, a few old towels that had seen better days. I had them all neatly stacked in my arms, and then I just stood there in the hallway, not knowing where to put them. That's the part no one tells you about. You can decide what to let go of, but if you don't have a place for it to land, it ends up right back where it started, a pile on the chair, a bag in the garage, a thought in your mind that whispers, I'll deal with it later. I used to think decluttering was about making decisions, but over the years, I've learned it's just as much about making space, not just inside the cabinets, but inside the process. A basket by the door, a bin marked donate, even just a corner of a room that becomes the halfway spot between now and gone. I remember my neighbor Jean, she's 68 now, once tried to do a full kitchen clean out. She was proud of how decisive she'd been, said she filled 3 boxes in one morning, but then 2 weeks later, those same boxes were still on her kitchen floor. When I asked why, she smiled, a little embarrassed. I didn't know where they were supposed to go, she said. So they stayed. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes it's not the emotions that trip us up, it's the logistics. No landing zone, no closure. Things just float in limbo, making our homes feel unsettled. But it's not just about boxes. Sometimes we do that with memories too. We pack them up in our hearts, but we don't give them a place to rest. So they linger. They clutter our quiet. Letting go is easier when we know where something will go next. Even our memories need somewhere soft to land. Now, before I begin a round of decluttering, I ask myself one simple question. Where will this go when I'm done? If I don't have an answer, I wait. Because I've learned, with age and with grace, that not everything needs to be rushed out the door. And speaking of rushing, there's another mistake I've seen far too often. It's when we expect ourselves to do it all in one go, as if clutter we've gathered over decades should disappear by dinner. But our hearts don't work like that. I remember standing in my living room one quiet morning, just after my daughter had left. She'd stopped by to help me declutter, her words, not mine. She meant well, of course, but as I looked at the little handkerchief she had tossed into the donation bag, I found myself gently pulling it back out, smoothing the soft, worn edges, and folding it neatly again. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't useful. It wasn't beautiful. But it was mine. And it held something only I could feel when I looked at it. Maybe it was the memory of a laugh or the comfort of a time when life moved slower. Maybe it just made me feel like myself. You see, people don't always mean harm when they tell us what we should keep or what we should let go of. Especially our kids or grandkids. They often just want to help. But what they sometimes forget is this. No one else lives inside your memories. No one else knows the quiet comfort of a small thing that's been with you through the seasons of life. A dear friend of mine, Ruth, she's 74 now and living alone, once told me about a time her grandchildren came over to freshen up her space. They cleared off her shelf, boxed up her old photo frames, and said, "You'll feel lighter with less stuff, Grandma." But when I visited her afterward, she looked at me and said, "They meant well, but that shelf was the last place in this house that still felt like my story. Now, it's just empty, and so is something inside me." That stuck with me. Because decluttering isn't just about removing what's visible, it's about honoring what still matters. And only you can decide what matters, not your daughter, not a neighbor, not a well-meaning magazine article, you. Decluttering is not about clearing space for others to be comfortable. It's about shaping a space where you still feel whole. And then there's something even harder to let go of than the stuff itself. It's the quiet habit of letting others speak louder than your own voice. Shall we keep going? The next one is a tricky one too. I was folding a quilt the other day, one my wife had stitched decades ago. The edges were frayed, and the colors had softened from years of use and washing. As I ran my fingers along the seams, I caught myself pausing, not because the quilt needed folding, but because my heart needed a moment. You see, sometimes we're told to just get rid of it, just toss it out, donate it, move on. But after a certain age, we know better. We know that the goodbye isn't always about the object. It's about the memory wrapped inside it. And rushing that goodbye, it doesn't make the letting go any easier. It just makes it lonelier. A woman I know, Lorraine, told me once about the day she cleared out her late husband's closet. Everyone told her it would feel freeing, cathartic. Just rip off the Band-Aid, they said. So she did. 2 hours, 4 bags, and a glass of wine later, the closet was empty. But her heart? Not so much. It wasn't the clothes, she told me. It was that I never got to say goodbye to each thing. I didn't get to remember how he looked in that blue sweater or the old flannel he wore every Sunday. I threw it all out like it was just clutter. But to me, it was chapters. That stayed with me because I think there's this unspoken pressure to be efficient when we declutter, as if slow means weak. But for women who've lived through lifetimes of love and loss, of building homes and holding on, slow is sacred. It's okay to pause before you let something go. It's okay to hold it, cry over it, smile with it. That's not being sentimental, that's being human. Letting go isn't one big goodbye, it's 1,000 quiet thank yous whispered between heartbeats. And if we allow ourselves that grace, the grace to go slow, we'll find that what we truly want to keep has a way of revealing itself. And sometimes it's not the things we struggle to release, it's the parts of ourselves we thought we had to leave behind with them. Maybe you've made one or a few of these mistakes. I know I have, not just once either. And every time I catch myself rushing, holding on too tight, letting guilt speak louder than grace, I try to pause, take a breath, remind myself that decluttering isn't a chore to conquer. It's a quiet practice, a way of being softer. With the home I live in and with the heart I carry, we're not here to perfect the space. We're here to make room for peace, for breath, for mornings that don't feel so heavy. And that takes time and kindness. So if something in today's video touched a place inside you, I'd love to know. Was there a moment that felt familiar? A mistake that made you nod and smile a little? Or maybe one you're finally ready to face this week with a bit more gentleness? Leave me a note in the comments if you feel like it. Sometimes even just saying it out loud makes it feel a little lighter. And if you ever need a voice to walk beside you through this season, know that this space is always open, like a soft porch light at dusk. Steady, quiet, waiting. You're never doing this alone.